Hey everybody, this is Hunter Williams. I hope you're doing amazing wherever you are at today. Today's actually going to be the March 2026 Q&A video. Although I am publishing this, I guess it will be April 3rd, 2026. I wanted to make sure I got through your questions that you submitted to me for March. So if you submitted a question, I'm going to do my best to get through it today. But just as a reminder, if you do want to submit a question to me, that link will always be in the description of the podcast that I publish. So just look for that. It's got a little link that says video topics, submit request form, and you can send me a question that I get to in these Q&As. A lot of times too, I will send out emails if there are really good ones to do, if they're a good topic. But what I've done today is I've taken these that I got for the last month and then broke them into categories, and we're going to rip through those. So before I get into everything, thank you guys so much for the amazing and overwhelming amount of support I receive. The best place to stay in touch with me is on the email list, just in case I get kicked off of any more platforms on the future. And all I do on the email list is just send out notifications of when I publish videos and then also other things that I'm working on. And obviously too, if you want to join my private group, that's called the Axion Collective. We do live coaching calls every Thursday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. And if you do want to ask me a question, you can privately message me inside there and make sure that your question gets answered, and you can have conversations with me in there, in the forum or in a private message. So without further ado, I'm going to jump in, and today let's answer some of your questions. The first category we're going to start off with is GLP-1s. Really good one here to start. I'm in the max dose of Tirz at 15 milligrams per week and still not at goal weight. Can I stay at 15 milligrams indefinitely? And how should I switch to RETA if needed? So it's kind of a tough question to answer that's going to be different for everyone. My best recommendation for this would be to actually stay on the amount of the peptide that you need to be on until you get to your goal weight. And for some people, that might even mean cycling off of the peptide and then coming back onto it, or continuing through and then maybe upping the dose. Now, this person's at 15 milligrams and they're not reaching their goal weight. And so this is a lot of the times too where I'll look and say, hey, we might need to bring something else in. And so to this person, I would say, hey, are we hormonally optimized? Because if your hormones are optimized and your thyroid is optimized, maybe one of those things that you actually get better results at a lower dose. And so I think oftentimes that's probably the best answer. Unfortunately, that's not the one that everyone wants to hear, because again, that's having to go find an HRT doc and do all those things to get on HRT and then to get the thyroid optimized. But I am not so much of the opinion that you have to completely come off the peptide, although I think that could be beneficial. But I do think it's one of those things, like, we don't want to be on a 15 milligram dose of tirzepatide every week for the rest of our life. I just don't think that would be beneficial. But it's up to you and how you decide you want to do it. But I would say for the person that wants to switch over to RETA, my goal for someone that's switching from Tirz to RETA would be to take like a 1 month period, kind of walk down the tirzepatide dose. Maybe it's like from 15 to 12 to 9 to 8 to 7, 6, 5, somewhere in there, and then switch to an appropriate dose of RETA, which would probably be about the same thing. But I wouldn't want someone to go from 15 milligrams of Tirz to 15 milligrams of RETA, just because I think the RETA is going to be a lot stronger. And in a lot of cases, that might not be the best thing for that person. Next question. RETA shuts down my gut after just 2 doses a week. Burping, food sitting in my stomach, dry heaving. Is there any fix for this? Unfortunately, for people that have that, really the only fix is to kind of let it get out of your system. And again, this is really relative to dose, but some people can have this happen at a pretty low dose. So sure, there's nausea medication that you can take and things like that. But honestly, it really is only going to happen as the medication clears out of your system. So fortunately, you're kind of stuck with that. Now, fortunately, the good part is it usually takes like 3 or 4 days for most people to kind of have that get out of their system. Next question. I ran RETA at 1 milligram twice a week last year with no issues. Restarted 6 weeks ago at the same dose, and now I'm getting nausea almost every evening. What change, and should I drop to 250 micrograms as a longevity dose? I would say for anyone that is getting nausea, the dose is probably too high, meaning that you may have just had more sensitivity to it. It's not uncommon now that we're seeing that people are actually increasing the number of GLP-1 receptors on their cell from using GLPs. So going off and coming back on, you might be a little bit more sensitive to it than you were the first time, although that's not going to be the case for everyone. But I would say for someone that has restarted it and is more sensitive to it, you might need to go down on the dose. And again, that could just come from improving your health over the long term and seeing the benefits of the RETA carry over to where you might not need it. So it's going to be different for everyone, but I would say if you're experiencing nausea and you're doing everything intelligently from a dosing standpoint, it's not the worst thing to drop down the dose to just get some of those ancillary benefits, to which I think there's a lot of people that can get ancillary benefits of RETA at even 100 micrograms per week. I've seen that and seen people feel good. Now, are they going to get a ton of appetite suppression, a ton of fat loss? No, but there's still benefits there. Next question. I lost 52 pounds on tirzepatide, plateaued, tried RETA, but my A1C started rising. Went back to Tirz and added Cagrilintide. Have you seen this combo used before? Yes, I have. I think Tirz and Cagrilintide is totally fine to use. That's what works for you. But interestingly, around this, glucagon can actually increase blood sugar. If you were to use injectable glucagon, which is different than retatrutide, obviously, glucagon is actually used in the diabetic world to help people increase their blood sugar if they go hypo and their blood sugar goes too low. And so I can and have seen this happening with the A1C going up. Now, is that the end all be all? No, I think if we get the body to a healthy metabolic state, get rid of the fat and get all the things that we needed in order for that, RETA can help do that, but it's not uncommon to see that when we're talking about glucagon. And I think that's where RETA is so powerful, because the GLP and the GIP components of RETA are usually enough to keep the A1C down, but it's definitely possible. But I think to someone, if they don't do well on it, there's no shame in using tirzepatide and then throwing Cagrilintide if you need more appetite suppression. I would say most people get enough appetite suppression on tirzepatide. It's usually retatrutide that you'll see people add in the Cagrilintide. But nonetheless, I think it's definitely something that you could use if it does well for you. Why is combining Tirz and RETA not dangerous? Can you explain why this stack is safer than people think? I guess there was a meme going around, or different influencers talking about Tirz and RETA being combined being dangerous. I've personally done this for several months at a time and got really good results with it. So if it's dangerous, I didn't see any reason why it would have been dangerous. I didn't see anything in my blood work to reflect that or anything like that. I guess it makes good clickbait if you talk about combining Tirz and RETA, but no, I think it's a perfectly feasible strategy to do. And the reason that you would do that is you basically are bringing down the proportion of the glucagon agonism. And so if the glucagon agonism, to my best guess, is around like 20% of the component of RETA is the glucagon piece. If we introduce tirzepatide on top of that, we're getting more GLP and we're getting more GIP. And so we now maybe bring down that glucagon from like 20% of the peptide to maybe down to like 5 or 10% of the peptide. And for a lot of people, one, that's going to reduce the hunger if they're getting more hungry on retatrutide, but it also too could reduce the overactivation of the nervous system, the increase in heart rate that a lot of people struggle with on retatrutide. But you may still want that glucagon piece to help with the energy expenditure of the liver fat. It just might be a little too strong in the ratio that it's in RETA right now. And so that's why I've seen people do that. But is it dangerous? I mean, we don't have a study to show that it's not dangerous, if that's what you want to say. But the people that are saying it's dangerous are not showing a study to show that it is dangerous. I've done that before. I've worked with tons of people that have done it. And a lot of people get really good results with that. Now, is that what everyone needs to do? Of course not. But it's not dangerous for sure. What causes some people to be non-responders or slow responders to GLP-1s, and what can they do about it? Well, I think when we look at non-responders, I haven't verified the truthfulness of this, but I've heard that there are different genetic phenotypes of people that just don't respond to GLPs, and particularly people of Syrian descent, I've heard, don't do well with GLPs. Now, that's just something I've heard, so don't take that with a grain of salt. I don't know if that's true or not, but I have heard that. And I have seen people that take high doses of GLPs and just do not respond to them whatsoever. It's definitely few and far between, but I do think those people are out there. What can they do about it? Well, there's lots of other fat loss peptides out there. Obviously, we want to cover the bases, right? We want to be on hormones. We want to use a GH peptide. We want to use mitochondrial peptides. We want to make sure that everything in our system is optimized, and then the GLP can be on top of it. But I think if you couldn't, for whatever reason, not have a GLP, that would be unfortunate. Or if the GLP didn't work for you, that would be unfortunate. Maybe it's a dose thing that people have to play with. There's things such as Cagrilintide that probably would work for appetite suppression. And then there's drugs like SGLT2s, like Jardiance, that I think work really well for things like that. So, it's one of those things, like, it will be few and far between, but I do acknowledge that it's out there. Speaking of Jardiance, someone says, I'm using Jardiance alongside RETA for synergistic effects, but I'm not a diabetic. Should I add anything to offset the elevated red blood cell count risk, or cycle off regularly? I don't see any issue with this. With Jardiance, you can get a slight elevation in red blood cell count, but I've never seen it on my blood work or any other people's blood work to where it was necessarily dangerous. So I would say you don't have to cycle off. If you're going to cycle off anything, I would probably cycle off the RETA. That's what I personally do, but I do take Jardiance every day, and it does seem to work pretty well. So What's the best stack to run alongside RETA or other GLP-1s to maintain or build muscle? Clo, follistatin. What does the protocol look like with proper diet and training? So if you were going to want to build muscle alongside RETA, I think you could use a low dose of RETA to work really well for nutrient partitioning. And although people wouldn't view RETA as like a muscle building compound, at a low dose, I think it does help with nutrient partitioning, but obviously how much you build muscles can be relative to your diet and your training, and then obviously your hormones too. So the number one stack I would say is to get on hormone therapy, because if you have optimized level of testosterone, whether you're a man or a woman, that's going to make a huge difference in the muscle that you're going to be able to build. Now, on top of that, I kind of like to think about, and this is one thing that we're actually talking about in our group this week when we talk about like non-androgen muscle builders, I like to kind of think about this is you have the growth hormone class. So you could have HGH or an HGH peptide to build muscle. We have growth factors. So we have things like IGF-1, LR3, PEG-MGF that we can layer in on top of those growth hormone peptides. Then you could get into the myostatin inhibition question. I don't think that's a path everyone needs to go down, but sure, you could get into ACE31 or ACE83 or follistatin 344 or whatever follistatin's out there. So I think that's a feasible thing to do. The next thing I would say is like a metabolic modulation. So you could have L-Carnitine. You could have even something like an SGLT2 to help partition nutrients that I think is going to be beneficial for building muscle and taking oxidative stress off the body during that muscle building phase. And then lastly, you would have something like injectable oxytocin. So that's a good thing that you could do. And that would kind of be how I think about building that stack. What peptides stack best with tirzepatide specifically for body recomp? Kind of the same question, but I would say those that I just answered really stack well with tirzepatide. And I think if you're going to do one, it would probably be a growth hormone peptide. I would go to a growth hormone peptide for body recomp much more than I would a peptide like MOTS-c or SS31. RETA and microdosing. Also, what can I add for liver support while on RETA? Well, hopefully, if you are just living healthy, the RETA is going to be really good liver support on its own. I would say things that you could add, SS31 is going to be very good for the liver and the kidneys, but then injectable glutathione is going to be great for the liver. You can take some oral TUDCA and some oral N-acetylcysteine or NAC. Those are really great for the liver. And then if you wanted to throw in a bioregulator, you could take, there's 2 injectable bioregulators, which I've got dosing guides on and everything on the cheat sheet. One of those being Ovigen and the other being Libogen. So I would check those out. But RETA is great itself for the liver. And then if someone is really concerned about liver health, adding those things on top of it should be beneficial. What are your thoughts on RETA stacked with 5-amino? I think it's amazing. I think stacking RETA with 5-amino can be amazing. I would just caution people to ease into it. There's a lot of people out there talking about taking like 10 milligrams or 50 milligrams of injectable 5-amino, injectable, not the oral. And while I say do you, because doesn't matter to me what you do, just be cautious with it, because it is one of those things. If you take enough 5-amino, it can definitely kind of raise your heart rate and cause this overstimulation. So if you're going to do it, I would start with like 0.5 to 1 milligram of injectable 5-amino and go from there. But it can work great. I'm a bigger fan, I would say, of doing the injectable 5-amino than doing injectable NAD. I think you can use both of them together, obviously, but I personally just like the injectable 5-amino more. So that would be my recommendation there. Next one is around, let's go to the next category. So we've got GH secretagogues and growth hormone. Oh man, here's a big one. Do you have to refrigerate Tesamorelin? I've heard it can gel if it gets cold. What's the deal? In my life, I have never had Tesamorelin gel in the refrigerator. However, I have seen people that if it is really, really cold in the fridge, it can gel. Now, there's this whole debate, and I really don't want to get into this because this is kind of silly. It's just one of those things that ends up driving lots of engagement on social media, because if you want to get views, and I don't do this, but if you want to get views, you just say stuff that scares people or makes them feel like they're wasting their money, and then they'll start fighting in the comments, and then your stuff gets lots of views, and then all of a sudden you're an influencer, right? Well, what's a lot harder to do is sit down and work and talk with real people and answer their questions and really see like what works for people and what doesn't work for people. But anyway, we talk about refrigerating Tesamorelin. Look, I don't care if you leave your Tesamorelin at room temperature. Honestly, most peptides, if you leave them at room temperature, they're probably going to be fine. Much more so than we actually believe. Now, does that mean that I do that? No. I put my peptides in the fridge because I know that's probably what is going to keep them stable for the long run. But there's actually a published study on MOTS-c, because there was this big debate on MOTS-c over whether or not it degraded within 15 minutes of being mixed with backwater. and they actually mixed it with backwater and left it at a pretty warm temperature. I want to say like 80 or 90 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't remember. But the MOTS-c stayed stable for 30 days at a warm temperature, and there was like virtually no degradation. So that's MOTS-c. It's not Tesamorelin. But do I have to refrigerate Tesamorelin? I don't know. I would say do what thou wilt. You probably are okay if you leave it out of the fridge if it's not too hot. But I put it in the fridge. But I've never had mine gel in the fridge. And if you've had yours gel in the fridge, then maybe you want to leave it out at room temperature. So I will, unlike a lot of other people out there, I will never claim to have the definitive answer on things that I can't definitively say yes or no. I will tell you, me, Hunter, I put my Tesamorelin in the fridge, and I have for years and never had any issues. And so I'm not a chemist, don't claim to be a chemist, but that's just kind of my thoughts on it. Next question, I'm finishing a 12-week run of Tesa, AOD, Glow, and RETA. Should I add Ipamorelin now or wait until my next Tesa cycle? Will the ghrelin bump mess with fat loss when I'm this close to my goal? I think you could go ahead and add in Ipamorelin now. And to the point of Ipamorelin with the ghrelin agonism, because it is a GHRP, which stimulates ghrelin. The good thing about Ipamorelin doing that is it seems to be selective, meaning that it doesn't raise prolactin and it doesn't raise cortisol, and it doesn't increase appetite. I would say very few people that I have talked to, worked with, heard from, ever really get an increase in appetite from Ipamorelin, whereas the other GHRPs, you would have MK677 as a GHRP, you would have GHRP2, GHRP6. I do see those. Now, MK777 does seem to be like an oral Ipamorelin because it's a GHRP, a small molecule GHRP, not a peptide, but it does seem to work well. So I'm a big fan of MK777. But yeah, you could go ahead and add Ipamorelin. I don't think the ghrelin bump will mess with fat loss at all when you're close to that goal, and it definitely won't cause the appetite increase like those other three that I mentioned will. So a very common question, I think important to always bring up. For women 55 plus, how does HGH compare to IPA and Tesa as a starting point for longevity? What should a smart stack look like for muscle, metabolism, brain health, and mitochondrial support? I would say HGH, especially for someone that's 55, is always going to be better. Now, when I say that, a lot of people are like, oh, well, Ipamorelin and Tesamorelin must be worthless. No, they are not worthless by any means. It's just that it's kind of like a car, right? Nothing is wrong with a Toyota 4Runner. Toyota 4Runners are great. But if you want a Ferrari is going to be more expensive and probably drive a little bit better, although I've never driven a Ferrari. Probably don't really plan to. I'm not that big of a car person. I like normal cars. I don't know, for whatever reason. I don't say that sanctimoniously or from a from a virtue signaling place. This is not one thing. Like, I've never been that interested in cars. But to the point, Ipamorelin and Tesamorelin are fine, but for someone that's 55, the body of a 55-year-old is going to respond at the right dose probably much, much better than someone that is in their 30s that probably will respond really good to Ipamorelin or Tesamorelin. So that would be my recommendation there. Can GH secretagogues help a female athlete with REDS whose period has been absent for 2 years despite eating 3,000 plus calories? Could they help rebalance hormones naturally without the pill? Well, I would say this. I think from the reproductive health standpoint for a female, the growth hormone secretagogues probably are not going to do much to address what is going wrong there with the health, meaning that this person, to me, female athlete, is lots of stress, lots of adrenal fatigue, lots of like hormonal shutdown. So I think in this case, the main thing that's going to help a female athlete like this, assuming they're allowed to do this with their sport, is testosterone. They're going to need testosterone and they're going to need progesterone. They might even need a little bit of estradiol. But to help get the menstrual cycle back, those are going to be the biggest things. And obviously eating 3,000 calories helps, but if you're burning 5,000 calories a day, well, 3,000 calories is still a 2,000 calorie deficit. And I say that as someone, I used to eat 6,000 calories a day when I played football, and it sucked. And guess what? I could still lose weight eating 6,000 calories because I was practicing for 3 or 4 hours a day, training, walking all over the place, when you have a busy day of school and football and things like that. So as someone that comes from this type of background, I get it. And I would say the GH secretagogues are going to help. They're going to, help a lot with sleep that would probably have an indirect effect on that. But I would say this pace, unfortunately, it's going to have to be, and I say that because a lot of people don't want to have to go down this route, but it's going to have to be hormone replacement. And then once you do go down the hormone replacement route, you're going to be like, wow, things are so much better now. Like, I wish I would have done this sooner. So What's the deal with Tesamorelin and ovarian health in women? I don't know. I don't know if this person was referencing someone else. I do think Tesamorelin could be beneficial for ovarian health, although I don't know specifically if there's research or something around this that showed that they're either not beneficial or they are beneficial. I'd love to hear more. Let's see. What's better stacked with RETA for belly fat, Tesa or CJC NODAC with IPA? And should I run SLU, FOXO4, and epitalon before starting MOTS-c? Well, first question first, I would say for belly fat specifically, we do have more data around Tesamorelin. Now, in this case, it's a woman asking this, so they might do better with CJC, NODAC, and IPA. But I would say, clinically speaking, Tesamorelin is going to be better for getting rid of visceral belly fat. I think women that are leaner don't seem to like Tesamorelin as much because it's so strong, and so they feel like they get bloated. But women that need to lose a substantial amount of fat, I think Tesamorelin could be great. And then to the point of SLU, FOXO4, and epitalon before starting MOTS-c, I think that's a great thing to do. I would do those and maybe even some SS31. Actually, I'd probably take the SS31 with the FOXO4 and the epitalon, because to me, that's much more of this kind of like healing environment stack to where we're healing the mitochondria. We're getting rid of senescent cells. We're healing, not really healing, but helping the pituitary gland with melatonin. That's going to be an antioxidant, helping with telomerase and things of that nature. So I would say get rid of the SLU, bring in the SS31 with the FOXO4 and the epitalon before starting MOTS-c, because I think in that case, the MOTS-c is going to work a lot better. How do you get the anti-aging and osteoporosis prevention benefits of HGH without increasing cancer risk? Well, to my knowledge, and I've combed high and low for this, to my knowledge, we don't really have any data that says that HGH is increasing cancer risk. We don't really have any data that show it's growing organs at the right dose. I think I was reading a paper the other day and we didn't see organ growth from HGH until 14 IUs in men. And actually at a lower dose, there was cardioprotective benefits. So to the point of increasing cancer risk, I'm not telling you to inject HGH if you have a bunch of tumors in your body. I don't think that would be probably the smartest thing. But I also don't think that someone that's healthy, that has a environment in the body that does not favor cancer, wouldn't benefit from HGH and could increase their cancer risk. And so it'd be one of those things I would say, like, let's just think about this a little bit more critically and see what data is out there suggests cancer risk. And maybe there is that I just haven't seen, to which I'm open to looking at, but what data is there out there that is suggesting more cancer risk? So that would be my opinion on that. Is I just haven't seen it in practice. And to that point, it's kind of like, where are the bodies? Like where are the bodies that people are falling like flies from using HGH and having cancer? You could run into other issues, obviously, with HGH and too high of a dose and then causing issues with anabolic steroid abuse. But for a replacement dose, we just don't really see it from what I've seen. Let's move to I've got a lot of categories, so I'm probably not going to get through all of these. Let's do some healing and injury recovery. I started BPC for hip bursitis and a ligament tear and developed anhedonia. I'm on Wellbutrin daily. Was the BPC the cause? Can I try it again, or should I just use TB500 alone? Well, it is known that BPC can affect dopamine regulation. Now, I don't know what the contraindication would be for someone on an SSRI like Wellbutrin, but it might not be well. If your dopamine is too low and serotonin might be higher, that could cause anhedonia. I'm not a neuroscientist, but that could potentially be it. So I actually think this is one of those cases where it's like it might be the peptide, or it could be the peptide with your unique neurochemistry, with the psychotropic drug that you're combining with it. And in this case, I would say we have TB500, we have Cardilax, we have GHK, we have PEG-MGF. And so that would be one of those things that I would use in replace of the BPC, because I think they're going to be just as good, but you're not going to have the downside of that effect on dopamine, which is interesting. Pre and post-op peptide protocol, timing and dosing, how to recover from surgery faster. Just shorthand would be Cardilax, BPC, TB500, GHK, PEG-MGF, those 5 things right there. And then KPV2 I would add in. So you get a Clo blend, Cardilax, PEG-MGF, boom, you run that up into the surgery. I would probably stop a few days before, and then maybe just 1 to 2 days after to kind of let the inflammation come in and do what it needs to do for the body. And then I would just go right into those after. And then all doses, pretty much the standard doses that you would see on those. Just had gyno surgery for recovery beyond BPC and TB500. What else would you add? Goal is to get back to holding my 1-year-old ASAP and minimize muscle and fat loss. I would say Cardillax, PEG-MGF, and for me, the GHK, if you're injecting the GHK post-surgery, I think it can burn and can actually like make the feeling. Now, if you tolerate it well, you can do fine, or you can do some oral GHK, some topical GHK on the site to help with that. And those would be the ones I add in, and then KPV as well. What are your thoughts on nandrolone for chronic forearm tendonitis? I think it can be great. I think nandrolone can be great for that. However, I would say there are all these other things like I just talked about with the Cardillax and the PEG-MGF. I think that will get a lot of people to where they want to be from a feeling standpoint. I think a lot of people use nandrolone because they have joint health issues. I don't think it's bad for that. I just think that there's easier things that probably have a less systemic side effect that nandrolone would. Again, and I don't even think nandrolone is dangerous if you're using it right, but I just think those other things could be pretty beneficial. This one is kind of around metabolic peptides. I have both MTHFR and COMT mutations. MOTS-c seems to interrupt the folate cycle. Could it cause problems for people with methylation issues? My inclination is to say no. However, I have noticed a lot of people having the opposite intended effect of MOTS-c lately, meaning that they take MOTS-c for energy and it actually makes them more fatigued. So I would say it's absolutely possible. The thing is, I don't think we really know until obviously it's studied, or a person just takes MOTS-c and they just don't respond well to it. And it, for that very reason, could be the case. And so honestly, I don't know. This is a very, very good question. I think we could probably investigate deeper and have more people in the community talk about, because I don't know. I don't know if it's one of those things that you will potentially do that and then have the downside. I think my opinion is a lot of times people that are getting more tired from the MOTS-c is they're overspending their mitochondria. They're building up this cascade of reactive oxygen species that build up in the body. And then that will cause these things very similar to how when people overdose or take too much SLU, PP332, obviously there are different mechanisms, but I think the same thing is happening with people that are overusing MOTS-c. All right. I'm interested in methylene blue and 9-MeBC as nootropics. What's your take? I think those could be good. They would not be my first ones to go to. 9-MeBC is more of a nootropic for dopamine specifically. And so you could start at a low dose of like 5 to 10 milligrams of that per day and see how that does. I personally don't feel the need to take that because I don't really have dopamine issues, not that I'm aware of. And then methylene blue, methylene blue can be good. Back when the craze with methylene blue was going on, I was kind of like, is it worthwhile to take? Is it not? I think it can be, but it just wouldn't be my first choice. So I would say that. Is Atomax really superior to C-Max? What's the best dosing protocol for Atomax? I don't know. With the nootropics, it just be different for everyone. I think chemically speaking, it is definitely superior to C-Max, but I would do the same dosing. I would do like 250 micrograms to start, see how you do, and then you can kind of build up from there. But a lot of people go up probably eventually to like 1 milligram. So I just say start low with the nootropics because someone, might not respond the same as you. And so just be careful with it. Not careful, but just kind of know what you're doing. What peptides can help heal damage to the hypothalamus and pituitary gland? My 22-year-old daughter had a brain tumor removed between the two. She's been cancer-free since 2015, but is endocrine deficient and on pharma replacements. Well, I would say that the first thing to that would be, it would be crucial for someone that had an issue like that to be on hormone replacement therapy, regardless of your age. And so I'm not a doctor, but as someone who has experienced pituitary dysfunction from concussions, I needed testosterone, right? Like my only regret with testosterone is that I didn't start it sooner. And so I would say hormone replacement therapy would be very important for that. But I think from there, we look at something like the hypothalamus and pituitary. You could potentially have a brain bioregulator like cortigen that could help those. I think there's also oral bioregulators now that are made specifically for the hypothalamus that are out there. And I forget the name of what those are called, but I would check that out. And then I think someone too, just to kind of help with that epitalon would be good to kind of help just restore brain function. But I think cortigen, epitalon, if you can find the hypothalamus bioregulator, those could be good. I think there's a pituitary bioregulator now called Endocron, And so you could check that one out. But I think the obvious answer for this one is going to be hormone replacement therapy. Are there any peptides that help with social anxiety, confidence, and fear? Yeah, I would absolutely say there are. It's kind of like one of those things. How much time do you have? I would say hormones first would obviously, for me, as someone who's dealt with those things, like hormones made my personality much more enhanced to the point where I didn't really struggle with those things as much as, especially like social anxiety. But I would say dihexa can be a really good one. Nupept can be a really good one. Oxytocin can be a really good one. I think those things kind of will help with all those things. But ultimately, when you look at someone that has anxiety, confidence issues and fear issues, the chemical piece is likely a component of that. But there's also a very real psychological, emotional, mental piece of that. And so I'm sure, if you're asking this question, you're probably working on all those things. But I would just say don't forget that. Talks about some, and we got a few minutes here left. So let's talk some autoimmune. Can Thymosin Alpha-1 or any other peptides reduce or eliminate autoimmune disorders like lupus? Absolutely. I've done stacks on autoimmune disease, but absolutely they can help. Obviously, everyone's autoimmune is going to be a little bit different, but that would be the first place I would start. All right, moving along just to finish up. Here's a good one around men's health. After a radical prostatectomy, how do you restore libido using testosterone, estradiol, and DHT? Removing the prostate kills your DHT production. Doctors don't tell you that. That's unfortunate. You can use injectable DHT, although that might be harder to come by these days. You could also maybe use something like a Primobolan or a Masteron to give you the analogous effect. Obviously, testosterone would be important, and obviously, you'd want to make sure estradiols are level good too, because that's going to help with sex drive. I think even something like a Proviron, I don't know if it's necessarily going to raise DHT, but it could have like a similar effect. And so maybe like 25 to 50 milligrams of Proviron a day could be beneficial in that case. But man, that's, I feel for any guy that's had that, because it's not a fun place to be mentally and emotionally, let alone physically. I might have early elevated PSA. Biopsy said no cancer, but precancerous cells with a cyst on prostate. Will healing peptides like BPC and TB500 accelerate cancer cell growth? I'm 38. I think this is like where we have to be like very cautious around what we take as the only opinion from a medical provider. I'm not saying the medical provider is wrong. I'm not saying not to listen to them, but early elevated PSA, what does that mean? And I don't know. Is it like a 1.8 PSA? And that what they're saying is elevated? And the biopsy said no cancer, but precancerous cells. Well, I guess every cell would be precancerous until it's not, right? If it's precancerous, I don't know. And I'm not a physician, so I don't claim to know the distinction between the two. So my opinion would be no, but again, you got to make that decision for yourself with your doctor of like, what risk are you willing to take to improve yourself? However, if the issue is healing, guess what we can do? We can use a peptide like Cardilax. We can use a peptide like KPV, where we don't even have to worry about the quote unquote risk. And I say quote unquote because it's obviously like risk in theory. We don't have to worry about those things, and we can get as much or even better healing out of those than we would with BPC and TB500. And so that would be my recommendation, is to have that conversation, like understand, what's really going on there, get different opinions and whatnot. But, I would say, there's other peptides out there that can get you the same goal. All right, almost done here. So it looks like we're right at 30 minutes, and now I'm gonna have to shut it down. What is a really good one that I can go to finish it up? Any experience with urolithin-A for mitophagy and spermidine for autophagy? What dosing levels? Yes, I do. I love both of those compounds. Urolithin-A, I would say the capsules are typically like 500 milligrams. So I would say 1 to 2 grams of spermidine, of urolithin-A per day. And that'd be like 2 to 4 capsules of most urolithin-A brands. And then for spermidine, I like somewhere around like 10 milligrams per day of spermidine. You can go as high as 40 milligrams, but I love both of those. I have great energy when I take those. I feel really good. And I've used both of them. And when I've gotten blood work in conjunction, obviously, with other things that I do, the blood work looked really good. So I love both of those. They do really well. And I think they're just good things to have in as a background player that we can do all the time, and maybe just go back and forth. You could probably do both of them at the same time. It would be fine. So that's it for today. Thank you guys so much for a wonderful, wonderful month of March 2026. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get to all the questions today, but Taylor and I are going to be doing a thing that we're working on where instead of doing the lives, we'll continue to do the live Q&As. But in addition to doing those live Q&As, what we'll do is some reader mailbag questions. So we'll sit down with some of the really good questions, probably take an hour or so and go really in depth because I kind of rapid fire through these. And sometimes I'm like, man, I need like 10 minutes to answer this question. So be on the lookout for those. But thank you guys so much. Again, just in closing, just know that my heart is so grateful that whatever shape or form or fashion that it is that I'm connected with you, that you're out there. Just know that I really appreciate you guys and everything that you do to support me. It's a dream come true for me to get to do this. And hopefully you receive that back in the content and what you can do with it. And, you know, whether it's liking, sharing, subscribing, telling your friends and family about it, you know, being on the email list, being on the private group, using my codes at places, they go so far in helping me bring you these messages. So that's it for this one. And I will talk to you guys in the next one.